I'm delighted to say that here live with me in the studio is Norman Baker and Aubrey Allegretti. Norman is the Member of Parliament for Lewis and a former minister himself, and Aubrey Allegretti is a senior political correspondent with The Guardian newspaper. Also joining in our conversation down the line is the former Conservative minister Ann Widdecombe. There she is in all of her glory. Ann, great to see you. Just a very quick one to get going and to make sure also that it all works. What's your reaction to the Kremlin having banned Boris Johnson from Russia? Not that I think he had any plans of going there, but one or two people are already saying it's a badge of honour.
Well, indeed. I don't think we need to be too concerned about that. I don't imagine Boris had any intentions to visit Russia in the near future. And I think it's recognition, the fact that he's chosen to ban Boris is recognition of the huge role that Boris has been playing in helping the Ukraine. So, great. I think Boris can be very proud of this.
We're going to start talking about Rwanda and migration, and I'll bring you back in. You should be able to hear Norman, who I know you know very well, and Aubrey as well. Do make it clear when you want to come in, and they may well want to come back to you. It's the four of us in open debate. Norman, let me start with you on the Rwanda plan. Your party leader, Sir Ed Davey, dismissed it as a cynical distraction. And yet the latest polling, which is in this morning's Daily Mail, shows that 21% of Lib Dems support it.
Well, you know, you shouldn't cut your conscience to fit the shear's clothing, if that's what the public at large think. But I don't think it's true. I mean, my respect for the public has gone up because of the way they've responded to the Ukrainian crisis, the willingness to accept refugees in this country who are faced with losing their lives, being tortured. These are the people who are, by and large, arriving in this country, whether they're coming by boat or any other means. We have an international obligation in law to receive people who are not, by the way, illegal immigrants. They are people who arrive claiming refugee status. At that point, it should be determined. But
the same poll, and I take your point about respecting the public view, the same poll suggests that over 80% of people are concerned to make a clear distinction between those who are asylum seekers, yes, refugees, yes, fleeing crisis, and those who are bluntly economic migrants looking for a better deal.
Well, I agree with that. But what happens is when people arrive here, they should be processed very quickly. Their intentions and positions should be examined. If they are genuine refugees, it should be processed quickly and allowed to integrate into the country. If they're not, they can be returned. And the problem has arisen over many years, and Ann will know this as a former Home Office Minister, as I do, is a Home Office is deeply slow at processing applications. So people are left in limbo for months and months, and the numbers grow.
Ann Widdecombe, answer Norman's point. You've worked there, as has he. Could they have done better without involving Rwanda?
Rwanda solution is a good one. Yes, I've got certain reservations about human rights, but I think that can be addressed. After all, this is a process. We are paying, so we can call the tune on treatment, and we can make sure that there are regular inspections. So I think Rwanda is a good idea. Norman is right to say that the processing of asylum applications is and has been for many years phenomenally slow. But one of the reasons for that is that they're not in detention, that they're not somewhere where we know where they are. The message that we send out to the world is, because we don't practice detention, we don't have national identity cards, and the message we send out to the world is, if you can succeed in getting into Britain, it's very, very, very minimal chance indeed that you will ever be removed, because it's the easiest country in the world, which is why they come here, to disappear and to go into the black economy.
All right. Aubrey, you're not here to represent either the Liberal Democrat Party, Norman can do that more than effectively, nor are you here to represent the Labour Party. I want to make that crystal clear from the outset. But you are here to represent the Guardian newspaper that embraces both of those positions more likely than they would embrace Ann Widdecombe's position. That same polling that I mentioned there to Norman suggests that 15% of Labour voters also think that the plan that Ann Widdecombe says is in the main OK, but needs a few tweaks here and there. And yet your newspaper and a lot of the liberal media simply said, it's a nonsense, it's wrong, it's humane, reject it. Public out there aren't getting very well served by you guys, are they?
Well, obviously, there is a split of opinion. It's not very clear-cut. There are people on the Conservative side that disagree with the policy. There are people on the Liberal side who disagree with the policy. And I suspect that people's views will change as we find out quite a lot more about the actual detail of this.
Yeah.
So, for example, when the first flights will be, exactly how people are going to be separated, so which women and children and men you're not going to include in the people that we send to Rwanda. So I suspect that really this is something that the public feels needs dealing with.
Yeah.
But actually, the practical implementation of the policy itself will be much more interesting to see.
But did anybody feel your collar whisper in your ear, either from Norman's party or from the Labour Party, saying, look, this Tory plan's are nonsense, it's expensive? Andrew Mitchell was very crystal clear about his criticism, and he's a Tory MP, and say, look, if we were in power, either Labour in majority or Labour working together with the Liberal Democrats or the SNP, this is what we would do. Because I did not see a word of that anywhere.
There has been a noticeable sort of quietness about certain parts of criticism of the plan, right? So from the Labour Party, they obviously want to look at the detail. They can completely understand that, right?
But Mark Seddon and Kate Hoey said we've been doing that for 20 years.
Yes.
And the hardcore of the Labour Party thinks that open borders are progressive, internationalist, socialist.
And they will obviously feel quite uncomfortable that we are talking about an issue that we thought we'd sort of put to bed at the 2016 referendum when people of this country voted to leave the European Union. And the Conservatives are very keen to reopen that and say, we obviously can't control our borders properly until we ensure that those people who are arriving here via irregular routes are dealt with and, you know, made to feel as though there should be other alternatives, that they should only pursue the safer legal routes that they are obviously pushing for on the left.
And do you accept that I'll ask my question then. No, come here. The timing looked cynical. You've had since 2016 to do it. Now the Prime Minister's in a bit of difficulty. Suddenly you do it. Ann Widdecombe. Timing cynical.
What?
Is the timing cynical? The Prime Minister's in difficulties. You've had 4 years to make a start on it. Why suddenly now?
Well, there's been about 25 years to make a start on this. I might remind you that when I was Shadow Home Secretary in 1999 to 2001, I proposed universal detention of all new asylum seekers. And Oliver Letwin, my successor, took it one stage further and actually proposed then, and that's at the turn of the century, he proposed that we should use offshore arrangements for processing asylum seekers to deter the abuse of the system. That is 20 years ago. So don't talk to me for the last 4 years. We've had COVID, we've got Ukraine, we've got massive things to deal with. But this has been hanging around through successive governments, Labour, Tory, coalition, unaddressed. I cheer that at last somebody's addressing it. Yes, there will be difficulties. I don't dispute that for a moment. It will take a while to shake down, but at last somebody's doing it.
I'm going to stick with Anne just for a moment, and then I want you, Norman, particularly to come back on her answer to what I say next. When you go back, Anne, into that period, you and I and Norman will very well remember the likes of Neil Kinnock, the likes of Tony Blair, Paddy Ashdown, Charlie Kennedy, opposition leaders who were big figures, who had big ideas, who said, if we're elected, this is what we do. What do you make of the current lot?
Not much, quite honestly. I mean, I think you're right. Even where people were very far to the left, people like Michael Foot, for example, a perfectly cranky manifesto, but they did have presence and they were listened to a certain extent. I mean, I do not know what Keir Starmer stands for. I mean, I knew what Neil Kinnock stood for and hated it, but I do not know what Starmer stands for. And everybody said, oh, yippee, we've got somebody moderate, somebody intelligent, somebody reasonable. What does he stand for? What, for example, is his answer to this? What is he going to do to stop the abuse of the asylum system across the Channel? What is he going to do? Tell us that before just criticising what the Conservatives are doing.
I've got Lord John Mann, who you all know as well, coming on at the end of the programme, and I promise, Anne, I will ask him specifically that question. But I said I wanted to come to you on that. I said in my introduction, I'm not saying Rwanda good, bad, indifferent, over costly. I've listened very carefully to what you've said, what Anne said, and I've read very clearly what Andrew Mitchell and others, even within the Conservative Party, have said. But that's my key point, is that your leader, Sir Ed Davey, and Sir Keir Starmer leading Labour, are not leaders of stature who can say, this not only stinks and is inhumane, but here's what we would do right now. And we're going to put someone like Norman in charge of it because he used to work in the Home Office. He knows where the bodies are buried. It just doesn't look impressive. And that's the real danger to a functioning democracy.
Well, oppositions, of course, are there predominantly to critique the government of the day rather than to form their own policies and put them forward. But nevertheless, having said that, oppositions, I think, need to plant flags and stand by them and say, this is what we stand for. And the evidence from the past is you don't simply win elections by waiting for the government of the day to fall apart. You win elections partly by looking credible and having policies people think are right.
But last time your party really made a mark in terms of a specific policy promise ahead of a general election was penny on income tax for education. And that did capture the public imagination. That was a specific proposal. It wasn't just a criticism of spending on education. No. It's what we would do if we were in power.
Well, I agree with that. And also, Paddy was very courageous, for example, about Hong Kong at the time, if you remember. We also led the opposition in Parliament to the Iraq War. So, yes, you have to take positions which are principled.
Yeah.
Sometimes they look to be unpopular at the time, but if you don't stand up for what you believe in, what are you there for?
Does it confuse someone like you, and I don't mean that sarcastically or tongue-in-cheek, that Anne said, I don't know what Keir Starmer stands for. I do, on economics, because he and Rachel Reeves and the team before her have been crystal clear that in the current cost of living crisis, whether it's right or wrong, they would hit the oil companies with a windfall tax, and that would fund hundreds of pounds for the poorest people and maybe even give a boost to universal credit or whatever it might be. They can be clear on economics. Why can they not be clear on something as sensitive as immigration?
Well, hopefully they will be. And obviously Parliament's in recess this week. And that's
Do you probe them? Do you press them?
They won't be, actually.
Well, I mean, you hope that when Parliament comes back from recess and this whole plan is announced, that then we will get a chance to hear from these people. And Labour will know that they cannot just sit back and wait for the government to fall apart, that they have to prove to people that there is a reason to vote for them and that they understand the issues that have dominated politics for the last 4 years since the referendum and longer before. So I'm sure they will.
Can I tell you why they won't, I'm afraid, is that Labour has calculated they have to win back red wall seats in the north. They assume, perhaps correctly, I don't know, that this is a touchstone issue for those seats. And if they seem to be, inverted commas, soft on this, they will not win those seats back. That's why they're keeping their heads down. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, there is a tricky line to a tightrope to walk, isn't there? So we're not.
So Ann Widdecombe, Aubrey as a political correspondent, and Norman as a frontline functioning Liberal Democrat say, watch this space. As someone who's been in this game for a good deal of time, been through the ups and downs, is it Tory party thinking, in your understanding, that we can just carry on as Tories with what we're doing at the moment, and it'll be all right on the night?
Well, I wish they would carry on as Tories, because if they were carrying on as Tories, we wouldn't be having tax hikes. And one of the reasons that I haven't rejoined the Conservative Party is that I don't think they are actually carrying on as Tories, quite honestly. But yes, I mean, you make a point, because quite inevitably, when governments have a lot of trouble, they will tend to take the view, look, let's deal with what we've got to deal with now, and, let that play out. And most people actually in the very centre of politics do understand that today's polls are not necessarily tomorrow's polls, and that 2 years before the next election is actually quite a long time.
That's fascinating, because that nods with respect to both Aubrey's analysis and Norman. Final question, and you preempt it brilliantly by saying polls are polls are polls. But there is one poll as well I want to mention, which I'm sure you've seen in the Times newspaper this morning, that says around 2/3 of people out there, and they're the only ones who matter in all of this, say that if the Prime Minister is hit with another fixed penalty notice over Partygate, he should go. 2/3.
Well, I, for a start, don't think he should go. with a war on at the moment, in which he's doing exceptionally well, I think it would be stupid to try and make him go. I also take the line that, quite honestly, if he'd sent out invitations to all and sundry, come to Downing Street, well, I'd be saying he's not fit for office. But he was simply having a slice of cake, most of which was uneaten, I gather, with a group of people with whom he'd been working all day. They'd been associating all day. If they sat round a conference table, that wasn't breaking the rules. The rules themselves were stupid. The inattention that was paid to how it could be presented was stupid. But quite honestly, compared with what's going on in the Ukraine, if Keir Starmer wants to go waffling on about Partygate and Partygate and Partygate, 2/3 of the public will eventually say, what is this all about? I mean, do we really want to change Prime Minister in the middle of the Ukraine crisis, particularly one who's doing as well as this one is doing, and who's now got the badge of honour? He's been banned by Putin.
Ann Widdecombe.